December 18th, 1944. Night had fallen like a lid over Europe. The sky was sealed with thick cloud, the kind that killed visibility, swallowed sound, and made even 1,000 engines feel muted. In Luxembourg City, the lamps inside 12th Army Group headquarters threw pale light across maps, message slips, and reconnaissance photographs. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley sat hunched over the table, not because he was tired, but because the war had leaned forward and put its weight on his shoulders. For 2 days, the Germans had been pouring through the Ardennes forest, terrain the Allies had labeled quiet, unsuitable, unlikely. Those words now felt like a confession, written in ink and paid for in blood. Reports came in uneven and frantic. A battalion pushed off a ridge and scattered. An outpost overrun before it could transmit. A regiment cut off by armor that should not have been there. American units that had been told the Ardennes was a rest sector were now fighting for their lives in frozen woods and narrow villages, where tanks could appear at point-blank range and the trees carried the sound of engines like a warning. The scope of the German offensive was becoming clearer, and it was worse than anyone had wanted to believe. This was not a raid, not a spoiling attack, not a desperate flare meant to buy time. This was weight. This was mass. This was intent. Bradley's staff officers moved like men in a storm, stepping around one another, reaching for phones, turning radios up, turning them down, trying to separate rumor from fact. Communications were disrupted. Roads were jammed. Units were out of position. The line on the map, clean, confident, carefully drawn, was now a suggestion. Bradley picked up the phone and asked for George Smith Patton, Jr. Patton answered from the south, where 3rd Army had been hammering at German defenses for weeks, where a breakthrough had finally begun to open, where Patton could smell Germany and wanted to run. His voice carried energy, almost excitement. He spoke about a bridgehead across the Saar, about momentum, about the road into the enemy's heart. It was the sound of a commander who believed the war was about to give him what he had always wanted: speed. Then Bradley cut in like a man slamming a door. "George," he said, "there's a lot of trouble up north." Patton's enthusiasm paused, like an engine dropping a gear. Bradley explained the situation. German forces moving through the Ardennes. American divisions overrun. The front cracking. Bastogne, an ugly name few people back home could pronounce, was suddenly important because it sat at a crossroads of roads that controlled movement through the region. The 101st Airborne had been rushed into place and was now surrounded. Without relief, they would not be held forever. Not with ammunition running down, medical supplies gone, and the weather-grounding air support. Bradley needed something immediate. He needed the 10th Armored Division moved north at once to help stabilize the chaos. Patton objected. He said the quiet part out loud. Without that armored division, 3rd Army could not exploit its own success. Everything his soldiers had fought for near the Saar would be wasted. The moment would be lost. He spoke like a man watching opportunity slip through his fingers. But Bradley was insistent. Eisenhower wanted all senior commanders at an emergency conference at Verdun the next morning. Patton had to be there. When the call ended, Patton did not do what many men expected him to do. He did not curse and go to sleep. He did not sit in anger and wait for orders. He did something that separated him from other commanders. He prepared to be ordered before the order arrived. Patton called in his staff, officers who had learned that when Patton looked at a problem, he saw not only danger, but motion. He listened, briefly, to the latest intelligence. He had an intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, who had been warning for weeks about German buildup opposite the Ardennes. Koch's methodology was meticulous, and Patton's dismissals had been practical. Third Army faced east and south, not north. The Ardennes was not his fight. Now it was. Patton told his staff what had happened. He told them Eisenhower wanted him at Verdun. And then he said the sentence that made the room freeze harder than the winter outside. "We're going to be ordered to turn north," Patton said, "and we're going to attack into the German flank." His officers stared. Turn north. 90 degrees. Third Army was oriented for operations into Germany. Its artillery was positioned to support eastward assaults. Its supply dumps were arranged to feed units moving east. Its communications networks were built around that flow. To pivot an army was not like turning a car. It was like trying to rotate a city while it fought. Someone said what everyone was thinking: it would be extraordinarily difficult. Patton's response was sharp and final. "Start planning," he ordered. "I want 3 plans. 1. Attack north with 3 divisions. 2. With 4 divisions. 3. With 6 divisions. Have them ready in the morning." They worked through the night. Maps were unfolded, roads traced, distances measured, bridges marked, fuel requirements calculated. They plotted movement orders like surgeons planning an operation with no room for error. They identified intersections where military police would have to stand in the cold and direct streams of vehicles for hours. They calculated how to move artillery battalions from firing positions near the Saar to new positions facing north. They drafted signals plans to rebuild communications networks that would otherwise collapse during the pivot. The logistics were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of men, tens of thousands of vehicles, mountains of supplies. The roads in that region were narrow and already clogged with winter traffic and war traffic. Ice would stop trucks. Snow would hide mines. Fog would blind units. Yet the plans took shape because Patton believed something that other commanders respected but feared. In mobile warfare, tempo mattered more than perfect preparation. The side that moved first, moved fastest, forced the other to react. While Patton's staff fought the clock, Bradley fought something worse: responsibility. As 12th Army Group commander, the Ardennes sector had been under his oversight. The Allies had believed that terrain was unsuitable for major German operations. They had placed inexperienced divisions there, thinking it quiet enough for green troops to learn without being crushed. Now those decisions looked catastrophic. Bradley knew he would not be judged by the theory. He would be judged by the results. December 19, 1944. Morning. Verdun's caserne looked like a place the war had forgotten until the war decided to use it again. The conference room was freezing. 16 senior commanders sat bundled in heavy coats, breath visible in the air, boots stamping occasionally against the floor to bring feeling back into their toes. On the wall, the map showed the bulge, Germany's thrust into Allied lines, like a swelling bruise. Eisenhower called the meeting to order with the directness that made him both respected and feared. "The present situation," he said, "is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster." For a second, the words seemed absurd. American casualties were mounting. Units were scattered. The Germans had achieved surprise. The line was bending. Bastogne was surrounded. But Eisenhower's instinct was strategic, and it was sharp. The German offensive had pulled reserves forward. It had opened flanks. If the Allies could hold, then strike. The Germans could be trapped in the corridor they had created. Eisenhower outlined the situation. The German offensive aimed to drive toward the Meuse, capture Antwerp, and split the Allied armies. Bastogne was critical because it was a crossroads where 7 major roads converged. If the Germans got those roads, They could move faster than the Allies could respond. If they were denied, their offensive would choke on its own traffic and fuel. "We must hold Bastogne," Eisenhower said. Holding Bastogne meant relieving it. The 101st Airborne had been rushed into position, and now they were besieged with elements of the 10th Armored and scattered units. They were tough, but toughness did not create ammunition. It did not create medical supplies. It did not evacuate wounded men bleeding in cold buildings. Eisenhower turned to Montgomery. Montgomery spoke carefully, methodically. He could organize a counteroffensive from the north, he said, but not quickly. He needed time, a week, perhaps longer. He wanted forces massed and supplied properly. Other commanders echoed similar timelines. 10 days. Proper preparation. No reckless moves. Then Eisenhower looked at Patton. "George," he asked, "how soon can you attack north with a substantial force?" Patton rose. He walked to the situation map like a man who had already lived this moment in his mind. He did not fidget. He did not soften his answer. He did not ask for more time to study. "I can attack with 3 divisions on December 22nd, Patton said. 48 hours from now." The room reacted like it had been insulted. Some officers laughed. Some shook their heads. A few stared at Patton as if he had lost his mind. Third Army was engaged to the east. Turning 90 degrees in winter conditions and attacking uphill into German armor was not a routine maneuver. It was a gamble that could collapse into chaos. Eisenhower pressed him, needing clarity. "When can you start?" he asked. "The morning of December 22nd, Patton repeated. He named the divisions: 4th Armored, 26th Infantry, 80th Infantry. Bradley's chief of staff leaned in and whispered that Patton had to be bluffing. Bradley didn't answer. He just watched Patton's face. Bradley had known Patton for years. He knew when Patton was performing and when Patton was committing. Patton was committing. Bradley spoke carefully because he understood what Patton had done. In front of the entire Allied command, Patton had promised the impossible. If he failed, it would not just be his reputation that burned. It could break the Allied response at the worst possible moment. "That's a tall order, George," Bradley said. Patton's reply was characteristic, blunt, almost casual. "We'll do it," he said. "My staff already has movement orders prepared. Units are standing by." Montgomery's contrast was brutal. He could not attack for weeks. Patton promised in days. Eisenhower made his decision. Patton would attack from the south of the Bulge. Montgomery would organize a northern counterstroke later. As the conference broke, Bradley pulled Patton aside. He did not speak like a general in a meeting. He spoke like a friend who understood what was at stake. "George," Bradley said, "you better deliver on this." Patton did not argue. He did not justify. He gave a simple line that sounded like prophecy. "I'll be in Bastogne by Christmas." Then Patton left to make that sentence real. From that moment, Third Army became a machine forced to perform a trick that should not have been possible. It had to disengage from active operations, pivot north, and strike, without losing cohesion, without collapsing into traffic jams, without starving for fuel, without breaking communications. The roads became arteries that could kill the patient if they clogged. Military police were positioned at intersections like surgeons. Engineers marked routes with signs to prevent units from taking wrong turns in fog and darkness. Fuel dumps were established along the routes so vehicles could keep moving. Artillery battalions had to be displaced, repositioned, and prepared to support new objectives. Supply dumps built for eastward operations were abandoned or relocated. Communications networks were rebuilt to face the new direction. Winter made everything worse. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow mixed with freezing rain, turning roads into glass. Vehicles broke down. Men rode in trucks that froze their breath inside their collars. Frostbite began to steal fingers. Trench foot began to swell boots with pain. And still, the columns moved. 4th Armored Division, chosen as the spearhead, began moving north. They were experienced. They had fought across France since the Normandy breakout. They were not easily shaken, but they had never attempted anything like this, moving long distances in winter, then immediately attacking into prepared defenses with no time to rest. Behind them came the 26th Infantry Division, tough and worn, followed by the 80th Infantry Division, another experienced formation that had earned Patton's respect. By December 21st, they were in position south of Bastogne. The distances they had covered were staggering. The time they had taken was still barely believable. Bradley watched the movement with a strange mix of relief and disbelief. He had doubted Patton's timeline. Now, 3rd Army was in position to attack on schedule. On December 22nd, Patton attacked north. The fighting was fierce from the first mile. German forces, surprised by the speed, were still determined to hold. They knew Bastogne mattered. They had positioned defenses south of the town, prepared ambushes, mined roads, and set anti-tank guns where they could kill armor from short range. Fog and overcast prevented air support. Artillery struggled to keep up with units moving forward and displacing. Infantry advanced through frozen forests where defenders could appear from nowhere. Villages became fortresses where every building had to be cleared. Progress was slow, but relentless. Patton's forces did not pause to perfect their position. They pushed because Patton understood what the Germans were counting on: time. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne held with the stubbornness that made them famous. Their acting commander, Anthony McAuliffe, kept morale through force of personality and the toughness of his men. When the Germans sent a surrender ultimatum, McAuliffe's response, "Nuts," became legend. But legends did not stop bleeding, and they did not fill empty ammunition boxes. Then, on December 23rd, the weather cleared. The sky opened like a miracle. Allied aircraft struck German positions. Transport planes dropped supplies into Bastogne, ammunition, rations, medical gear. Paratroopers ran through snow to retrieve the bundles like starving men grabbing food. Hope rose, but relief still had to break through from the south. By December 26th, Patton's spearhead was close enough to taste the town, but German resistance was still violent. 4th Armored's combat commands pushed forward in flexible task forces, tanks, infantry, artillery combined, fighting for every village, every road junction, every ridge. Combat Command B, led by Crichton Abrams, received the order that turned desperation into action: break through to Bastogne regardless of cost. Abrams formed a task force. Sherman tanks rolled forward. Half-tracks followed. Supporting vehicles charged behind them. The column drove straight up the road toward Bastogne, through whatever stood in the way. German fire hit them. Anti-tank guns barked. Small arms cracked. But the American column kept moving. Tanks fired on the move. Infantry cleared houses and strong points. The road shook under steel and ambition. Late that afternoon, a lead tank approached the perimeter. Its commander rose in the turret hatch, waving an identification panel. Soldiers of the 101st saw the shapes emerging from the south. For a second, they didn't believe it. Then the truth hit like heat. The siege had been pierced. Bastogne was no longer sealed. Supplies could come in. Wounded men could go out. The 101st Airborne, besieged and battered, had been reached. When Bradley received confirmation, his reaction was complex: pride, relief, and a stunned respect that he could not hide. Patton had promised the impossible. And in the way Patton had meant it, launching the attack on schedule, turning an army in winter, driving through resistance, he had delivered. Bradley called Patton. He congratulated him. Patton replied with characteristic defiance, refusing the word rescue. He said the 101st did not need rescuing. They were doing fine. He claimed he had only opened the door so they could continue the fight. But Bradley understood the deeper reality. Without that door, the story would have ended differently. And in the days that followed, as the fighting continued around Bastogne and the bulge began to bleed out, Bradley would write words that revealed just how surprised he had been. He would admit Patton did it better and faster than he had any right to expect. And that was not just praise. It was a confession that in the coldest week of the war, speed had become salvation, and the one general everyone feared would overpromise had turned a promise into history.